Talia, runaway human. December 7th, Earth Year 2103. Following the absolute emotional tempest that was our encounter with Prosure, the rest of the journey to Othuk spaceport went comparatively smoothly. Animal control and the police were too busy fighting off Strider forces to bother with two random strays, and in spite of my fears, the Jakuvian governor made no further attempts to stop us. "You're almost there," announced Dovetail's voice from inside my head as we scrambled over another mountain of rubble, avoiding the main road wherever possible. "Once you get to the spaceport, find a transport vessel labeled Liberty in the Rubolian language." "Why that one specifically?" Enzo panted, leaning up against the remains of a brick wall marked by graffiti. Adrenaline could only keep a human going for so long, and for us that time was quickly drawing to a close. "Of the 11 transport vessels currently docked at your destination, only 2 are operating on SIDAR Navigation Systems version 4.6. This system iteration possesses a software error that can be used to bypass captain authorization. Of these 2 vessels, the Liberty and the Voyage, the former is a Kormada model Ophith, the drive core of which can be calibrated remotely for an emergency jump." "Point taken," my partner replied, breaking into a labored jog so as to catch up with me. Cresting the next hill of debris, relief flooded my mind as I stopped at its apex to look upon the spaceport just within running distance, framed like a picture by smoking craters and floodlights that flickered with each distant explosion. The port nevertheless stood out like an oasis in a desert of dangers. With the chaos of the Strider raid still in full effect, any security systems would be a non-issue as there were no guards left to intercept us. Carefully navigating down the rubble slope and using up the last dregs of our energy to climb a wire fence separating the spaceport from the open road, Enzo and I entered the main building and began to search for the ship aptly named Liberty. "Which terminal is it docked at?" I asked our benefactor, my eyes scanning the signs that pointed every which way as though expecting one of them to answer instead. I felt a buzz in my inner ears. Dovetail was connected, but they weren't saying anything. It was like they were hesitating for some reason. "Strange," they replied at last. Looking at the Liberty's details, it is listed as having docked at both terminals 7B and 13F. Likely this is an administrative error. You will need to check both of them. "That's fine," Enzo sighed tiredly, his tone indicating a very different sentiment than his words. "I'll check 7B. Talia can look at 13F. "Shouldn't we just go together?" I asked, my nerves still frazzled from all we'd been through getting to this point. The other stray was my only physical ally in this war zone, and the notion of separating from him made me feel queasy. Enzo shook his head in reply. "It'll be faster this way. If the ship's at my terminal, I'll fire my gun in the air so you know to come join me. If it's at your terminal, then you fire yours. Deal?" Much as I hated his idea, I couldn't deny that Enzo was making sense in that moment. Every additional second we spent searching for the ship was another second to get caught. "Fine," I conceded. With both terminals marked as being to our right, Enzo and I remained together for a few more minutes, as we intermittently jogged and sprinted through the port, sidestepping the bodies that littered the ground. Most of them belonged to Xenos, their backs littered with bullets. Amongst this mosaic of remains, there were a few armored sets that looked to have been from Straters. Unlike the Xeno bodies, however, the human ones didn't look like they were killed by bullets. Bent and mangled in unnatural directions, the Talia from mere days ago would probably have vomited at the sight of them. One body had been folded in half backwards. Another was almost entirely intact save for the head, which had been smashed against the floor, mutilated into a pancake of blood and brain matter. Continuing along until the signs pointing to our respective terminals were no longer in agreement, I parted from Enzo with a forced smile and continued the jog to Terminal 13F. My legs felt like they were about to give out on me, but the promise of a long flight through subspace during which I could rest them seemed enough to motivate my body to keep going. Exhaustedly staggering through the spaceport, my eyes wandered absently along the myriad bodies decorating the floor. In one spot, leaned against the wall, I saw a human in civilian clothes draped over the body of a Valrax child, as though to protect them, though clearly this hadn't worked as both of them were riddled with bullets. Spray-painted haphazardly in red beside this gruesome display was a single English word: traitor. I had only just passed Terminal 9 when I heard the sound of a gunshot echoing through the building from somewhere far behind me. Relief flooded my veins upon the sound of Enzo's promised signal. After all, it meant that I wouldn't have to trudge all the way to the 13th terminal. Then came a second gunshot. Then a third. Immediately I turned on a heel and began to sprint back in Enzo's direction, tripping and stumbling over bodies all the while. "What's happening over there, Dovetail?" I asked, hoping that my benefactor could give some clarity as to whatever danger I was charging into. "Unfortunately, I'm facing some interference at this time. I cannot tell you what is occurring." My legs burned with exertion as I dashed down the long spaceport corridor, listening intently for more gunshots that might indicate a continuing fight. I heard none. Panic flooded my veins as worst-case scenarios danced through my mind. I hadn't known Enzo long, but in our time together he'd become a sort of lifeline. I wasn't sure I could go back to doing this alone. Charging up the steps to Terminal 7 with my pistol at the ready, I arrived just in time to see my fellow stray thrown to the ground, standing over him with its white chrome body scuffed by dirt and caked in dried blood. The martyr regarded Enzo with cold detachment as it placed its foot upon his chest to prevent him from getting back up. "Your activities during this ongoing crisis have implicated you as a Strader collaborator, marked for immediate euthanasia." Aiming Prosure's gun directly at the martyr's center of mass, the two shots I fired bounced off harmlessly, succeeding only in getting the martyr's attention. When its eyes locked onto me, I noticed the machine's posture shift slightly, as though it were trying to appear less intimidating. "Talia!" it began, its foot slowly beginning to press down harder into Enzo's chest. "I have been instructed by Councilman Prosure to retrieve you unharmed. Please drop your weapon." A loud crack echoed through the terminal as one of Enzo's ribs gave way to the martyr's crushing force. My partner screamed out in pain and for a moment struggled with renewed force. "Let him go!" I demanded, shouting at the top of my lungs in the vain hope that maybe this martyr would listen. "I am sorry, Talia, but that request conflicts with my directives," replied the machine, leaning down to grab Enzo's discarded gun before leveling it against his head. "Initiating euthanasia." Time seemed to slow down as my heart pounded mercilessly in my ears. I had maybe a second to stop the martyr from killing Enzo. Shooting it would be pointless. My gun was little more than a toy to this thing. I did, however, have one idea. "Let him go," I repeated the demand, this time pressing Prosure's gun against the side of my own temple. "Or I pull this trigger and you fail your objective." Sweat dripping down my forehead mingled with the gun's kiss of cold steel as I stared down the Council's enforcer, half expecting them to kill us both then and there. But it didn't. Instead, the martyr lifted its foot away from Enzo before dismantling the gun it held with mechanical precision. "Talia, it is obvious you are in a heightened emotional state," it began, its monotone voice not wavering for a second as it held out its clawed hand. "You are not thinking clearly. Please relinquish the firearm so that I may keep you safe." "How stupid do you think I am?" I hissed in reply, my grip on Prosure's gun only tightening upon the martyr's request. "If I drop this gun, you'll just kill Enzo and drag me back to Prosure." Behind the martyr, Enzo struggled to his feet, holding a hand over part of his torso. "Talia, can you distract it while I get the ship ready?" "I'll be fine," I nodded, making sure not to take my eyes off of the martyr for even a split second. I had seen more than enough footage of these things to know that their lumbering appearance was a lie. If I got distracted, then this martyr would be more than fast enough to close the distance and disarm me. Our assailant didn't react as Enzo staggered down the hall attached to our escape vessel. Instead, it remained concentrated entirely upon me. "It is evident you value that stray." Enzo, you referred to him as. "He is not a priority. If you come with me now, then I will have no reason to harm him further." "List your objectives," I demanded, refusing to dignify such a proposition with any kind of response. Internally, I assured myself that if the situation called for it, I'd sacrifice my life to ensure Enzo got off-world to continue Dovetail's plan. "Primary objectives: defend civilians, uphold council law, neutralize threats," the martyr recited bluntly, its robotic voice unwavering. "Current mission requested by Councilman Prosure: retrieve the human known as Talia and return her unharmed. Mission priority: Alpha." "Talia!" Dovetail's voice shot through my mind, momentarily supplying me with a glimmer of hope before immediately ripping it away with their next words. "The vessel Enzo has entered is not the Liberty, it is the Voyage. I'm attempting to hack the drive so that I can calibrate a jump without manual input, but it will take a few minutes. You need to keep the martyr distracted." My arm was getting tired and I could feel my hand starting to cramp, but I couldn't risk switching my grip. If I did, then there was a chance the martyr could close the distance and snatch my gun away. "Were you the one who killed all those humans back there?" I asked, knowing that every second I could get this thing to waste talking meant more time for Dovetail to complete their hacking. "They were endangering civilians." I responded accordingly. "Under normal circumstances, your activities would mark you as a straighter collaborator. However, Prosure has explicitly overridden your status. I don't believe you understand the value he has placed upon you." "Not enough to let me be free," I growled, only further enraged by the machine's diplomatic words. If Prosure really loved me, he wouldn't send a goddamn martyr just to keep his beloved pet on a leash. For the few moments where the machine didn't say anything, I could practically hear the logic trees in its head working on overdrive to concoct an excuse for the indefensible actions of my master. If you truly value human liberation, then it is in your best interest to return to Prosure. He is a council member who holds immense power on multiple worlds and considerable sway with the entirety of council space. It is probable that you could accomplish much more as his pet than as a stray. Obviously, I knew that was ridiculous. Even still, the fact that I had to think for even a second about why was proof that this thing was getting in my head. "It wouldn't make a difference," I spat back at it. "You belong to the council, and do they ever listen to you?" When a sapient becomes a martyr, they swear an oath to uphold the council's judgment. It is not our prerogative to question their will. Looking upon the terrifying presence of a martyr, it was sometimes easy to forget that they used to be people. Once you remembered that fact, they were even worse. Something about the way this thing moved, the way it talked, didn't feel like a machine. "Who are you?" I asked, perhaps out of morbid curiosity, or maybe just because I was stalling for time. "My origins are irrelevant. Classified," it began, its tone utterly devoid of emotion. "You know?" I sighed in exasperation, my finger twitching on the gun's trigger. "You're a really shitty hostage negotiator." What the martyr did next actually surprised me. It cocked its head, only by a few degrees, an ever so slight change, but it was enough to be noticeable. It was as though I'd said something that confused it. "Most hostages do not talk this much," it remarked, its voice still utterly monotone. By this point, my arm was on the verge of giving out, and it was obvious that the martyr could tell. "You know it is unhealthy to hold your limb in that position. I would advise you to switch to the other arm." "Again, how stupid do you think I am?" I growled, doing my best to ignore the searing pain in my cramped arm. Clearly, the martyr was trying to get me to lower the gun for a second so that it could rip away my only weapon. There wasn't a chance in hell I was going to let that happen. "That subject is not relevant," continued the martyr, taking a step closer to me. Just as its heavy metal foot touched the ground, my heart fluttered with relief as behind it the ship's engine roared to life. The martyr turned its head to look upon the ship, and for just a split second I saw an opportunity to switch the gun into my other hand. Just as the barrel lost contact with my forehead, however, the machine grabbed a piece of rubble and, spinning around to face me, tossed it clean into the gun, sending it skittering along the ground before coming to rest just 5 feet or so away from me. I tried to dive for the weapon, but the martyr was faster. Just as my fingertips made contact with the warm, sweat-slicked grip, it grabbed my arm and lifted me away from it. "No, no, no!" I shouted, struggling fruitlessly against the machine's impossible strength. "Please don't do this." Naturally, the martyr didn't even flinch. My begging meant nothing to it. "Cargo acquired." It droned, tucking me under its arm like a football as my resistance amounted to that of a belligerent toddler. Then, it stopped. Out of nowhere, the martyr just dropped me. I didn't waste time thinking about why. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe Dovetail had hacked it somehow, but for a good few seconds, it didn't move. "Priority altered." The machine droned, not so much as glancing back at me as it lumbered off. "What was that?" I asked Dovetail, staggering onto the voyage as Enzo prepped the controls to take us out of orbit and into subspace. "I am unsure," replied our benefactor, leaving me in stunned silence. I had no idea what had stopped the martyr, and surely I'd spend hours agonizing over it. But at that moment I was much too exhausted to think about it, and so, seated in the leather co-pilot's seat next to Enzo, I found myself falling into a fitful sleep.